he does soup. We have crock pots.
There are 3.
Okay.
And I can bring mine in from home. I have a bigger one.
I have a bigger one too that I think I'm gonna ask her if she needs.
But they're in the, go back where the dishwasher is. They're down below on the across from it, on the bottom.
Is there a rubber apron and rubber gloves?
No, I should buy those.
I'll get them this week.
Then make sure you save that. I've been meaning to do that, and I haven't. There are.
Where would one go to buy a rubber apron?
You want to go where they have.
You can all join in if you know.
Come on, you know, cookout. I'm flipping burgers is what I'm doing.
Do it on Amazon. You'll have
Either do it on.
That's true. I'll do Amazon.
Amazon will have it, but also now you know if you have Jane order it, it's tax free, and it's delivered free, because we have an Amazon account. Just a thought there, but and I'll be quiet.
Why does one need a rubber apron?
To use the dishwasher.
If you get one that they use for cookout aprons, you know what I mean, that's kind of fire retardant. That's what Chuck Conaway used, and it worked.
Are dishwashers that dangerous?
No, they're just wet.
They're wet. It's a big sink, Patty, with a hose that you do it by hand, and then you put them in a sterilizer.
So if you've got something nice.
Oh, that's not mine. Dishwasher.
My idea as a dishwasher is I hand the apron to somebody or give them and say, hey, I'm going to go in and have an extra cup of coffee or a glass of wine. That's my idea, but no.
Oh.
Especially if you're short. Now, you may not have as much problems as
I am
do.
not going to partake.
Well,
Gary has promised he'll do that for us.
I've even gotten water on my glasses. When you're short, it really sprays.
And there's water on the floor. It's just
never mind.
like a shower room.
We need to get ready for geology of the Bible. I'm sorry, we're doing business.
Okay, so I wanted to show just a summary slide. Can everybody see that fine?
Mm-hmm.
Nothing personal, but I'm going to sit where I can see better.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Sort of the, one summary slide of what we talked about last week, and that is that the Holy Land, the Middle East, lies right on a plate boundary, and the plate boundary is that's where all the Earth is made of plates, and the boundaries of the plates is where all the earthquake activity is, because that's where all the movement is, and you can outline the plate boundaries just by adding up where the earthquakes are located. So the Arabian plate or Saudi Arabian plate is moving that direction away, and the boundary goes right through Israel, Lebanon, goes up to Syria, and all the way up to Turkey, and this is called the Dead Sea Transform Fault, and a transform fault is where the plates don't come together or go apart, they go sideways with respect to each other, and so that's showing the motion along there. We read an Old Testament couple verses about in Amos and in Zechariah about earthquakes, a very big one back then, and then I just want to read on Good Friday, at the moment, the curtain, this is from Matthew, at the moment the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, the earth shook and the rocks split. And then, and actually Matthew does describe an earthquake on Easter Sunday too. After the Sabbath, at the dawn, on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven, going to the tomb, rolled back the stone, and sat on it. So there were a couple of earthquakes. Probably the second one on Sunday was what's called an aftershock of the one on Friday, which is very common because these plates still, the stresses build up, they finally break, and then there's many aftershocks because the rocks are adjusting back to each other after they've broken So I just wanted to mention that. I did learn, we're in the men's group, this is, we're reading a book about Jesus in first century Palestine, and what I just told you here is the story of plate tectonics, and what I learned is that Jesus was a tecton. That's how he's described, and tecton means builder. So we talk about Jesus being a woodcutter, you know, a carpenter. The actual word is tecton, which is, I'm very familiar with that because it's plate tectonics, meaning plate building up of plates and building up of mountains and stuff like that, and Jesus was a tecton. So I thought that was kind of just a play on words, but it's kind of cool. It struck me. What I'd like to do is now, and then we talked about the Sea of Galilee. This is a couple images. I mentioned that pilots in the past have used the San Andreas Fault as to navigate from LA to San Francisco. And this image here is a segment of the San Andreas Fault, and you can see how it's sort of knife-like cut right through the crust right there. And then this is a digital model, elevation model, topographic photograph with the trees and the vegetation and all that gone, and that of the Dead Sea Transform Fault, and you can see the fault very clearly. It takes a little bend up here, and then it goes all the way up to Turkey, and that, so it really, really shows up dramatic. Again, it's kind of like a knife just cutting through the rocks right there, and then here's the Dead Sea up there, and the Sea of Galilee segment right there, and we talked about how those seas are tectonic seas. They're related to the Transform Fault, and it's segmented. And when you do that, and you basically segment a fault with this kind of motion, you open up the area in the segmentation, and it forms a basin or a depression, and then that fills in with water. And that, so the Sea of Galilee, which, you know, we're all very familiar with, where Jesus had did much of his ministry is a tectonic sea or lake, and then the Dead Sea Transform is similarly that. And the Sea of Galilee is the lowest elevation freshwater lake in the world, and the Dead Sea is the lowest saltwater lake in the world. It's the lowest point on Earth, on land, on Earth. And then here's a photo of the Dead Sea Transform area. Sometimes it's called the Dead Sea Rift, and then up in Jordan. And then you can see how there's mountains on either side, and the low-lying region there, and that's right along that cut in the topography. So yeah.
Both the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee were caused by this rift.
Yes, by this fault movement. Yeah.
But one's salt and one's freshwater.
Yeah.
Does that mean anything?
Yeah, it does. It does. So, I'm going to get to that.
Okay.
The big theme here today is going to be salt. So that's just a cool image of that. And then the last thing I wanted to touch on, which I didn't get a chance to last week, before we leave earthquakes and plates altogether, is that when earthquake destruction happens, it's the result, the devastation, physical devastation is very different from other types of destruction, such as like wars. And what happens is, so here's some columns of in Hippos, east of the Sea of Galilee. Okay, and this type of collapse happened during the earthquake on the Dead Sea Transform Fault in 749. And the reason we know that this is earthquake related and it's not related to, you know, like Samson, you know, pushing the columns apart and things collapsing and that is because the energy that moves through the rocks does so in a consistent pattern, and the rocks will all, the pillars and the walls and stuff like that will all tend to collapse in one direction as a result of that.
Oh, like dominoes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's related to the seismic energy that moves through the rock quickly and then and shakes the ground, and the ground shaking can either you know, typically ground shaking is kind of like this, and so when the rock energy passes through it, they fall over and they all fall parallel to one another and that, and so that's how you're going to hear about archaeology next couple of weeks. But that's one of the things that archaeologists do is try to say, is this city, was it destroyed by an earthquake, or was it destroyed by, you know, human beings, wars, and, you know, stuff like that. And that's one of the differences. So I think that's important. There's also, they look at when, they also believe that when they find crushed skeletons of people underneath, you know, this stuff, that's again a sign that it was unexpected, and that's probably related to an earthquake and not a war where people are getting away and stuff like that. So it's kind of an interesting point. I wonder if we can. Is that better? Or worse? Or not?
No, it's a little better.
It's
Is
a
it?
little better,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, this photo is so I wanted to just talk about the Sea of Galilee, which is actually mentioned in the Old Testament and the New Testament. And the Sea of Galilee is in the goes by a number of names. The name has changed across there. We know it best as the Sea of Galilee, but it's also called the Sea of Kinneret. And that's in Numbers. Let me just look that up here. Numbers 34:11. When in Numbers in this chapter 34, they're describing the boundaries of Canaan, and that word, you know, and so and it says in verse 10, for your eastern boundary, run a line from Hazar Enan to Shephem. The boundary will go down, continue along the slopes east of the Sea of Kinnereth. Then the boundary, and Kinnereth is the name for Galilee, so what we know now is the Sea of Galilee. Then the boundary will go down along the Jordan River and end at what's known as the Salt Sea.
Dead Sea.
And the Salt Sea is the Dead Sea. So they're describing, what they're doing is they're describing exactly the Sea of Galilee. The Jordan River flows right through the Dead Sea Transform Fault, that valley that I showed, and then it goes and it ends down at the Dead Sea, or what's in the Bible called the Sea of Salt. The Bible never refers to it as the Dead Sea. It's just the Sea of Salt, and that. And I'm not quite sure who killed the Dead Sea, but anyways. There it's known as Kinnereth. In Luke 5, 1, it says, the calling of the first disciples, one day as Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, and that is the Sea of Galilee. That's the lake or the Sea of
really?
Galilee. Yeah, the names of the lakes changed depending on important people or important towns at the time and that. But so Lake Gennesaret, with the people crowding around him and listening to the word of God, he saw at the water's edge 2 boats left there by fishermen, and it's the Sea of Galilee has historically been an important fishing lake, and that. So, and then John 6:1. Sometime Jesus feeds the 5,000. Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee. That is the Sea of Tiberias. So it was also known. Tiberius was a Roman officer, important person, whatever. And so there's a city of Tiberias on the western side of the Sea of Galilee, and so they also called it the Sea of Tiberias. So,
Did they tend to call it by whatever town it was near when they were at it or something?
yeah. As
So
the,
it's why it
well,
changed?
yeah, I'm not. I guess I'm
I
not
don't
sure.
know. I don't know that. I'm just
yeah.
asking.
The Sea of Galilee. Did I say this is a picture of the Sea of Galilee? Okay, and the Sea of Galilee is used to provide 100% of the water for the cities surrounding it, and now because of population growth and that, and the fall of the sea level, and that as a result of population growth and irrigation and stuff like that, it only provides 10% of the water around the region, directly around the Sea of Galilee. It was, I learned this as I was looking at this, preparing this. The Sea of Galilee was important. The Syrians in 1964, in 1948, Syria invaded the newly formed Israel, and they grabbed a piece of the shore of the Sea of Galilee, partly to control the water, and in 1964, they attempted to divert some of the water. It was called the Headwater Diversion Plan, to take it away so that they could use it instead of Israel, and that ultimately played a role. It wasn't the only thing, but it played an important part in the 1967 Six-Day War, and that it was, and Israel grabbed back the Golan Heights, and the Golan Heights. There are springs in that area that feed the Sea of Galilee, and that. So water. I mean, part of it is related to water wars and stuff like that. So, today, we're looking at the south end of the Sea of Galilee. It is a freshwater lake, and it's a big area for tourism, of course, especially for Christians. And thousands of people go to the south end of the lake, where the Jordan River starts to flow as an outlet. The Jordan River flows from north to south, and it flows. So the water's leaving the Sea of Galilee, and thousands of Christians get baptized there every year. And that, and here is Kinneret. This is from a paper. Kinneret water, or the Sea of Galilee water levels. This is just to show how from 2004, so we're looking at the last, 14, well, this goes up to 12, so it's an 8-year time span, but it's showing how the Kinneret, the sea is below sea level, so the surface of the sea is negative 209 meters down below sea level, and you can see how over the years the sea level is dropping below, down. It's dropped 4 meters in 10 years, and it's getting down another 6 down. So they're worried about the problem of the overuse of the Sea of Galilee, and some of it's related to climate change, but a lot of it is related to irrigation usage so it's a concern. Water flows into the Sea of Galilee, flows through it, and then flows out. And it's fresh water because there's more water there, but as it continues down the Jordan River, it flows ultimately into the Dead Sea, and then there is no outlet for the Dead Sea. No water flows out of the Dead Sea. It's the lowest point on earth, and water can't go uphill. So
Basic woman.
So the reason that the Dead Sea, or the Sea of Salt, is salty compared to the Sea of Galilee has directly to do with the fact that there's more evaporation going on in the Dead Sea area than in the Sea of Galilee, and salt is a result of more water being evaporated than being drained into it. So the salt comes from the area. The rocks are being weathered, and the water carries the weathered material down into these seas, and then it continues through the Sea of Galilee and brings it down. But then by the time you get down to the Dead Sea, evaporation has increased so much that you start to form salt down there. So that's where salt ultimately comes from. The rocks that are being weathered around it. I wanted to show this because in 1986, the what's now called the Ancient Galilee Boat, or it's dubbed Jesus Boat, was discovered in '86 when when the water level in the Sea of Galilee was particularly low during a drought period, and they found this, and it's a first century fisherman boat, and that there's no direct ties to. They had no idea if it was Jesus' boat, but they like to, because tourists are so sacred, they like to say it's Jesus' boat, but it's it's really the Ancient Galilee boat.
Those guides will tell tourists anything
That's
tourists
right.
want to hear.
That's right. But it's on the northwest shore of the Sea of Galilee in Israel, so that was kind of cool. So I wanted to move down now. So we're this is the lowest point on Earth, on land on Earth, okay, the Dead Sea, and it's related to the fault segmenting. So you can see that the Dead Sea today is here's Jerusalem. So here's the Dead Sea, the northern part of the Dead Sea. Then there's a area where it's constricted, and then the south part of the Dead Sea down there. And here is Mount Sodom today, just on the west side of the Dead Sea, and this is recognized, or the area where Sodom, the old cities that aren't there anymore, but Sodom and Gomorrah were right next to the southern end of the Dead Sea area. Masada, the famous fortress, is right there on the western side of the Dead Sea, and then and then Jerusalem up there. So the Dead Sea.
Do you think that's why the wife turned into a pillar of salt? Because of the Dead Sea and the saltiness, where that came from in the Bible?
Yeah, you're stealing my.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll be quiet. I'm stealing your lecture. I apologize. I just happened to think of that.
Stealing the thunder here.
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. Yeah. It's what I want to do is look up, read that. So, but let me show you a photo first of this. So it's not that good of an image once you blow it up. But this is a image of the Dead Sea from Jerusalem. Okay, so you can see the mountains on the other side. We're facing east over there, so there's the mountains there. Part of the reason that it's so dry there is because it's in the rain shadow of the Judean mountains. So it's called the rain shadow effect, which is the same. I told you that I've worked out in Death Valley in California, and Death Valley is so dry. It's the lowest part in the Western Hemisphere. It has salt flats all over it, and it's so dry partly because it's in the rain shadow of the Sierra Nevadas. so the air goes up to go over the mountains. It gets cooler, and that it drops its rain on the mountains, and then the air that keeps moving is dry, and that's partly why the Dead Sea is so salty, because of the rain shadow effect. But here is a couple images I got from Wikipedia of the salt precipitating in the Dead Sea. It is one of the saltiest, besides being the lowest saltwater sea, it's one of the saltiest seas. If you've been to Utah, the salt flats in Lake Bonneville, in the northern part of Utah, the salt flat, it's about as salty as the salt flats in Lake Bonneville. So the Great Salt Lake area in northern Utah. So, Jesus talked quite a bit about salt. You're the salt of the earth and stuff like that. These people were very familiar with salt and that. So this is salt forming today, but there's also salt that has formed in the past and has actually formed layers that are very thick, like hundreds of feet thick in the past, and that because it just keeps accumulating and accumulating over time, and actually these salt layers have become part of the cliffs and the rock layers that surround the Dead Sea, and here's just another image of the salt that's accumulating in the Dead Sea. And then this is Mount Sodom, and this, if you go there to visit, the tour guides will tell you that this is Lot's wife.
Ah,
Okay.
was a little early for that. Sorry.
And so let me just read it. Where everybody's familiar with this, but now you'll see why Lot's wife was turned into a pillar of salt and not some other type of pillar. In Genesis 18, I'll read about the destruction of Sodom. Genesis chapter 18. By the time, so Lot's fleeing, by the time Lot reached Zor, which the sun had risen over the land, then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. Thus he overthrew those cities and the entire plain, including all those living in the cities, and also the vegetation of the land. But Lot's wife looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. And see, I have reference chapter 19. No, okay, so right. So what we have here is this is the salt layer, and this is all salt down here, and then it's capped by a layer of limestone on that on top of it, and you can. So this is the salt that's being eroded away, and the area it's arid. There are often fractures in these salt formations, and those fractures weather away, and they form these gaps or pillars. They result in these pillars forming, and actually, because not the tourists, tour guides go elsewhere as well across this region. This is the most well-known one. That's where it's Lot's wife, but other tour guides, there's plenty of pillars around, and other tour guides will say, well, this one's Lot's wife and that. So there were some other pictures of them as well, but they all kind of look like this. This is the best known as Lot's wife. But so when the story being that they turned into a pillar of salt, people would have related to that because there's these pillars of salt all over the place surrounding the Dead Sea, and this is right in the area where Sodom and Gomorrah were, and that. So if geologically or whatever we had been, all of this had happened up in like northern Finland, Lot's wife perhaps would have turned into a pillar of ice or something, something like that. And so, the other thing that the Dead Sea is well known for is bitumen or asphalt that comes out of occurs in the Dead Sea area. Here's a cave in Mount Sodom that some tourists are looking at, and this is all salt. There, I mean, it's hundreds of feet thick. This salt is, and this salt is not the salt that's forming now. It's the past. It's like 1 or 2 million year old salt that accumulated in a larger sea at that time and created literally what's called a rock formation or a salt formation that then has been uplifted by tectonics and then eroded and weathered away and that. So, but salt has been collecting, and this is probably 1 or 2 million years old, this salt formation. So the area has been saline geologically for a long time and is still saline today. And this is bitumen or petroleum product, and that it's also known as asphalt. Okay, asphalt is human made, but it's made from petroleum products, and there's a lot of this type of natural asphalt or bitumen, or you may have heard of it as pitch as well, and floating around. It's coming from seeps down below the Dead Sea, and that, and this stuff would be very easy to burn. Okay, and so what the part I read to you about, then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah. The idea that perhaps this is the source of the sulfur. As this burned, the sulfur would have gone up into the air and then come down as acid rain at the time on that. So, but it's kind of, and then this bitumen here would have been used as a waterproofing on the fishermen's boats. I mean, they find it's tar basically, and they would have used that to waterproof their boats, and also they believe that some of the tar provided the materials that the Egyptians used for mummification processes as well. So the Dead Sea area has been an important area for resources such as the pitch and the salt and stuff like that, and they believe that some of that stuff they went up to the Dead Sea area and grabbed the bitumen and the pitch and brought it down and used it for mummification. So it's the nearest source, at least, of tar. Here's an image that I grabbed showing water is big in this area, just like it's big in many parts of the world today. Many of you have probably heard of the Aral Sea, which is a sea that used to be the 4th largest sea in the world, and now it's nearly completely dried up in the last 40 years or so. The Dead Sea here's the image of what it looked like in 72 satellite images. It's 1972, 1989, and then 2011. And they're showing the Dead Sea is shrinking. Those blue areas, those are they've created in the southern part of the sea salt diversion plates or whatever, areas where they're actually creating salt and making it to mine it. Basically, they're pulling it right out of the water and so that's all human made now. But you can see, especially in the northern part, how the sea has shrunk, and they're concerned about that. And there is a plan because if you shrink the water levels to too low, it can cause ecological disaster. There are some things living in the sea, even though they call it the Dead Sea. There are some unusual fish and stuff like that that still live there. But they are concerned that these water levels will get too low so that it's irreversible. The ecological disaster will become irreversible. So what they have planned is this called the Red Sea, Dead Sea water conveyance, where they're going to take water from the Red Sea down there and basically pipe it to the Dead Sea in order to keep that water, the Dead Sea, at above a certain minimum level on that. This is starting this year, and it's expected to be completed in the next 4 or 5 years, this water diversion plan. And we're seeing a lot of this in cities like in Arizona and stuff like that today. They've created the Arizona Canal, the Colorado River Canal, and they're diverting water from the Colorado River down to Tucson, and that so that the people can use it. And unfortunately, that causes a drying up of the Colorado River, and that so it's affecting. But these types of diversion plans are being used to aid with what's the water problem. And then the Dead Sea area is the oldest area of the world that was first used for health resorts. So here's a resort here, because of the climate, because of various health benefits of living in the area. It turns out that this was where Herod the Great went as a health spa, and it's the oldest health resort, and it's still used as a health resort today. Certain ailments that people have are supposedly, aided by, benefited by living in swimming in the salt sea and the Dead Sea and stuff like that. Because of the density of the Dead Sea, you don't need to swim. You don't need to know how to swim. All you need to do is go out there and you'll float. And that it's like a buoyant sea. It's like wearing a life vest. Everybody just floats around and stuff like that. So that's kind of cool. And I think that's what I have. So hopefully you appreciate the importance of salt in the Dead Sea area and in the Middle East, and now you know all about Lot's wife, and it's related to what people knew back then.
A quick tangent. There's a new 4-part series on Netflix called Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat, and it's about the 4 components that are important to culinary arts around the world.
Okay.
And there's a whole series. I mean, a whole one of the episodes is on salt.
Yeah.
And it is fascinating.
Yeah.
They say that salt is one of the very few ingredients that's used in every food preparation around the world. So that's why it's so important every place.
Yeah.
And they go all the way from salt mines to harvesting salt from seaweed in Japan.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating episode, really.
Yeah. They have been mining salt under Lake Erie for a long time.
Really?
Yeah.
Did not know that.
Yep. Morton Salt owns.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
So.
And Himalayan pink salt?
Himalayan pink salt. Yeah, they
I have
had
no
a,
idea what that is.
they
but
had
we
a
use it.
they had a store where they had bins. It must have been like 80 little squares of all different kinds of salts, and some are stronger in the salt taste, and some are less
Yeah.
strong. And you know, they're just like people are aficionados of coffee or wine. There are people who specialize in salt.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, you mine for the most part. You mine the salt, but now with now they can put these pans out there and just fill it up with a little bit of salt water and then let it evaporate and then just scrape it off and stuff like that. So yeah.
So it's more useful than just putting it on our roads in December and January.
Yes, yes, it is.
When I first came here, I came to this area in '92. I started at Kent State. They used to have tours, mine tours with the salt. You used to take groups down there and stuff like that. And then because of liability and that, the company doesn't do that anymore. And that,
So is this class going on a field trip then to see the Dead Sea? And
that'd be great.
I'll sign
yeah.
up.
And Lot's wife?
Yes.
Well, it
Many
depends
of
on
them.
which tour we're
Many
on,
of
whether
them.
we'll see that
That
one or
one.
the other one, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have actually floated in the Dead Sea.
Really?
Oh yeah, and it's what it is purported to be. Yeah,
Okay.
it was really fun.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's about the extent of geology in the Middle East. About 2 classes. That's about right.
I'm so glad you did this.
Yeah,
Yes.
this is really
I came in
fascinating.
with zero knowledge, and now I have a little tiny bit of knowledge.
The very first slide you had up showed a finite focal point or something.
Yeah.
What is that above my pay grade to know what that
Or above my intelligence
my intelligence.
level. Yours might be pay grade, it's mine intelligence level to know what that was.
Yeah, I didn't discuss that, but what they're doing is that when so these plates are huge, okay, and they encompass big parts of Earth, a sphere. So the plates they're not flat because they are around a sphere, so they have curved.
Okay.
And when you describe the motion between any 2 plates, the easiest way to describe them is to say that there's a pivot point or a focal point between them, known as the pole, between 2 plates, and that they move, apart like that, okay? And that's what they were trying to show they were showing the pole of the African plate and the Saudi Arabian plate.
Okay.
And they were showing the motion, and I see if I can. I don't know if I
It's a miracle the whole world doesn't just fall apart.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Right there.
So right where
The
the
finite
finite
rotation.
rotation pole.
Yeah, they
See, I
call
was
it
paying
they call it the
attention,
rotation
Jane.
pole.
I saw it too, but I thought it was
And,
my intelligence.
And if you look at it, so this is as the easiest way to describe the motion between the African and the Arabian plate is it's doing that, and it's rotating around because it's on part of a sphere, So you can see these arrows are all doing like that in the Arabian plate,
Okay.
and so that's what it's trying to show, and it's called the Euler pole, okay, which is Euler was a mathematician, and Euler, and he was looking at how do you describe motion on a sphere of plates. This was before, and then when plate tectonics was discovered, they used his mathematical models, and so because he had nothing to do with geology, but like he was mathematically thinking about that, and so we, call it the Euler pole, named after him, after this mathematician. And so, and any 2 plates anywhere in the world can have a unique Euler pole and describes their motion. And that, so this is a very nice one because the Euler pole's right within this frame right here, and you can see how it's the Arabian plate doing that, moving away.
Now, would you have, I got a question, might be above my intelligence level too, but as they move like that, is it, yeah, the closer you are to that point of rotation, the less likely you would have an earthquake? The farther away you are, the more likely?
It has to do with the rate of motion. So in a way,
Okay.
yes. So there's the rate of motion is greatest at 90 degrees from the pole, and then it's smaller and smaller. You can see how these two are coming together. So the rate of motion here is very small. So in a way, that's true. Yeah. The speed is faster. down here than it
Farther
is up
away
here.
it would be
Yeah.
from that rotation point.
Yeah.
Shouldn't there be a chain reaction if these two plates are moving? Shouldn't it then make that one move and create more earthquakes simultaneously?
Yeah. Well, it turns out that it's the boundaries are not set for these plates. So it's not just the plates that move, the boundaries in between them also move. And so the plates are changing size, they're shrinking and growing, depending on if they're bounded by completely divergent boundaries. And so the African plate today, except for right up here where it's starting to go underneath Eurasia, and that most of the African plate is just getting bigger and bigger in size. The Pacific plate, where we are, has reached its maximum size and is actually shrinking now. And so North and South America are moving, towards Asia, and eventually the Pacific Ocean, which is the biggest ocean now, will shrink in about 300 million years.
300 million years.
Will
Put it on your calendar.
and they've named.
I'll watch it from eternity, that's for sure.
They've named the new. We'll form a new supercontinent with the closing of the Pacific Ocean.
Wow.
Okay, just like everyone knows Pangea. Pangea was just the most recent supercontinent. There were older supercontinents, and there are going to be future supercontinents. And so it's America colliding with Asia. So they've already named it. It's the supercontinent of Amasia.
Amazing.
Isn't that amazing?
That's amazing. Amazing.
This has been very interesting.
Yes,
Thank you for
yes.
sharing with us.
Wonderful.
You're welcome. It's fun. It's I came here, and then when I started teaching is when I thought, I'd like to know something about the Saudi Arabian plate and everything, and I studied it up, and I didn't know that the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea, they're tectonic lakes. They're related to these earthquakes, and you read about them in the Bible, and and the Jordan River, that knife, the river is controlled by the fault,
And the other names you listed for the Sea of Galilee are words you see
In
like
the Old
names of
Testament.
churches and stuff, like
Yeah.
Kenneret or whatever.
Yeah. Gennesaret.
Gennesaret.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the K one, whatever that one was.
Kinneret.
Kenneret.
Yeah.
That's the church in Long Beach Island.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So churches are named after somebody
Yeah.
older. Yeah.
Yeah. And whenever we hear the Passion story now, it'll mean something different when you hear about the earthquake on Good Friday.
Yeah.
And on Easter Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow.
That was an aftershock.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was really,
Very, very,
really
very well done.
worthwhile.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, do we need to go under anything else for when we get to January, November here? Or are you feeling pretty comfortable?
Oh, I'm feeling very comfortable with it.
Okay.
7 o'clock in the morning I'm not real comfortable with, but
Well, yeah.
I'll be here.
I can understand that too anymore. Although I'm up, I'm always at.
Step in a minute. Stay in here so she comes in, okay?
Do you know how to turn this little doodad off here, Daniel?
I have no idea.
Oh, good. Well, we don't either. So we're gonna go out in the hall and talk about some things. Sorry, Joanne and Pastor.
Joanne, I hope you're feeling better.
Edit this out, Pastor.
Mom, there's free pancakes in the social hall.
Never know.
Yeah, I never know what Joanne's gonna get, do we? Well, we ask you to edit out at the end.
I'm coming.